sometimes I think that people who draw comics and people who write comics are like from Mars and Venus. They have totally different conversations. I mean, the people who write them and read them seem to know all about what's going on in the stories and, you know, plot development and so on. I think I'm an extreme example of somebody who doesn't really know anything about that stuff. All I know about is how to put a line on a, well, I was going to say a piece of paper, but a piece of virtual paper, really. But yeah, I can talk about process.
My name's Ed Piskor.
I'm Jim Rugg.
We're back with the shoot interviews, Jimmy, and we have to do some big ones to make up for that deficit that we had for a while today. I'm not sure if it's Sir Brian Bolland yet, but goddamn it should be. Jimmy, give us some credits for the.
We all know him from Batman: The Killing Joke, of course. Maybe the definitive Judge Dredd artist. Certainly left a mark in my mind with that. One of the greatest cover artists to ever work in the comic book field, with 5 Best Cover Artist Eisner Awards to his name. One of the giant draftsmen of comics, and I am very excited to get into those details.
Super cool, man. He is the creator of the next artist edition I'm going to be getting at the turn of 2022 when they compile the Brian Bolland kind of studio edition full of his Judge Dredd work.
Yes, there is going to be that, isn't there? I've seen that advertised. I'm looking forward to that.
Did you get to curate that, Brian?
No, I didn't get to curate it, but I did get to scan in a lot of artwork that I had sitting around that the collectors didn't have. So I spent a bit of time adding stuff and also adding a lot of my prelims, which people like to see. You know, yes. The little pencil prelims, that sort of big.
Man, that's really cool. One of the things I was hoping to get...
But as to what goes in the book, it wasn't very up to me, and I didn't choose the image for the cover either.
Wasn't a bad image.
Surprised to learn that, because you know, I think of you as a guy who made a transition into digital, and I always think that's a big advantage with the way books are printed and produced today. And I thought that, you know, with that in mind, you might have your hands all over this book.
Well, you see, I think people fetishize artwork. I can see why. I mean, the David Roach, who I think was one of the curators of the book you're talking about, the Apex edition, I think you're talking about, he's a great collector of artwork, and I can see that. People do spend a huge amount of money buying artwork. Not from me, sadly, because I sold it all off cheap years ago, sadly. Not all of it, some of it I still have. But they love to see the artwork now that it's 40 years old and gone brown, and all the sort of bits that have been stuck on, you know, the little bits of blurb, the logo, they're partly peeling off. And it just annoys me because, you know, that was not the way I intended, any of us really intended them to look when they were printed in the editions. But people love to see what they look like now, what the bits of artwork look like. And I can see they do, but it's not something that greatly appeals to me.
Brian, one of the great fictions of the internet is that once you put something on the internet, it's there forever, and that is sadly not true in some very key instances. And one of those instances being your tutorial on digital illustration that used to be on your website. You were constructing a Batman cover with, I think you had like a lot of zombies clawing at him or something. And it was a step-by-step tutorial that that we try with our best total recall to kind of remember all the bits and pieces of it. And you know how memory works. It's not quite accurate. In fact, it's kind of fugazi in a lot of ways. One of the things that I swear I remember reading in that tutorial was that when you started drawing digitally, that you used a mouse to do so. Am I crazy, or did you always use a stylus?
I never used a mouse.
Okay,
that's not true. I'd never owned a computer until I went to see Dave Gibbons in 1996, I think, and he showed me. He showed me his work using Photoshop, and I realized I just had to learn how to do this stuff, because all of my black and white artwork was being colored by colorists who were using this stuff. So I knew I had to learn how to do this thing. So I immediately just bought this hugely expensive pile of machinery including a Wacom tablet and a pen and an Apple computer. And right from the start, I'd never used a mouse because I'd never used a computer, but immediately I was using a Wacom pen on a tablet. And I guess I've now spent so many years using that pen that's the way I draw. I've drawn that way ever since.
That was such a mythic document. Like I can remember once I met Ed, we would talk about that document because it blew our minds that you were drawing digitally. You know, we had been looking at your covers for years at that point. I think it was the early 2000s when I came across that tutorial. So you had been drawing digitally for several years, and I couldn't wrap my head around your line work just being all digital. It was it really kind of expanded my ideas for how digital, what could come out of digital.
Well, I mean, the thing was, I got into the Photoshop thing because if anybody was going to color my line work, it was going to have to be me, because I really didn't like the way the color was swamping the line, because I like to see the line. Most of the time I like to see the line. So I had to learn how to add the color to already drawn on paper line work. But having got the line work on a layer in Photoshop or one of the channels or something like that, I realized that actually that little bit of drawing there isn't quite right. I can add a line there, or just move that little line over there. And I realized that it was just as easy. In fact, it was so beautifully easy to use the pen to draw the line. You know, back in the analog days, I would have a pot of ink and I had a whole load of Winsor & Newton brushes. They would last a few weeks, and then the end would go blunt, or you'd end up with two sort of bristles that were the wrong length. There were all sorts of annoying little technical things that got in the way. Sometimes the ink was flowing beautifully, sometimes it was just too thick so there's a lot of annoyance about that. But a line drawn with a pen on a tablet, the ink never dries up, you know. You don't have to worry about the nib of the pen. Well, I say nib. A lot of people use a pen. I always used a brush. I've forgotten what the question was, but I do find, you know, drawing on a tablet perfectly. I mean, one of the things that people find unusual is that your hand is down there and the drawing is up there. Because now, of course, people are using Cintiqs, which means you can draw immediately on the thing you're looking at. To me, I'm so used to doing it this way that my hand is in the way. How can anybody draw when their hand's in the way? You know, I much prefer to do it this way.
The line work is certainly a hallmark of your craft with these covers, but another very, very distinct part of these covers is the color. Certainly, even when you started doing this digital work, this was an era when the computer color that would be in comics was very garish and technically done and kind of very overpowering. And your color had some noise to it, a little bit of organic quality. And I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit, how you were able to achieve such techniques, like look like spatter a little bit or something.
Yes, well, there are lots of lovely techniques. I mean, originally, when I was going out on paper, analog, we'll call it analog, I would be using acrylic inks for the color. I'd use an airbrush to get very smooth textures, you know, on flesh and stuff like that on the backgrounds. But switching to computer coloring, there is a tendency for everything to look a little bit too smooth and perfect. Particularly when I was drawing Jack of Fables covers, I was very keen to make it look like a sort of like an Arthur Rackham or a Dulac. You know, there's people who were painting fairy tale illustration in the early part of the 20th century. I wanted it to look like it possibly may have been done in watercolor on paper. So there are various, I mean, I still use actual bits of paper to create watercolor textures and spatter techniques, which are now saved as a file somewhere on the computer. And I can then add any texture I like to a smooth, matte bit of color just to make it look as if it's hand drawn. And I think it's important for me that the drawing is the way I would have always intended it to look. even though I've made this massive change from working on paper to working on this big box over to my right over here, which you can't see.
I have another question about your covers.
Oh, I'm glad. I'm so glad.
The figures, I think of you as a really great figure artist. And I wonder about the use of reference in your artwork and how you keep those figures from feeling stiff.
I do occasionally use reference. There are certain things I cannot draw, certain things I can draw without any reference. Oh, well, I mean, I have used a lot of reference in my time. I did some Spirit covers for DC when DC had the license for the Spirit for a while, and I cannot draw a man in a suit. So I because the way I mean, those wonderful artists in the past, you know, like Leyendecker or somebody like that, who knew what, I mean, they weren't drawing kind of people in spandex in those days. They were actually drawing people in ordinary clothes. They knew how the folds of an elbow or a trouser leg fell. And so I do tend to dress up in a suit or something and just to see what, you know, the trouser leg would look like. Hands, I tend to use, because it's so easy now to use a phone to take a picture of your hands, and they all, you know, I currently have a pair of hands, so I mean, I say that, so they're always available to be modeled. So I do tend to do a quick shot of a hand. As for faces, I mean, people do say that one of my strengths, and I don't want to boast about my strengths because there are so few of them, but one of my strengths is that most of the people I draw, they emote. You know, they all seem to have an expression on their face indicating something. I suppose I have a mirror over there. I do spend a lot of, I think when I draw the Joker, I tend to get a bit method. You know, I have to become the Joker. So I have to look in the mirror and just sort of go a bit mad, and it's quite possible I'm copying my own face, although I don't really look very much like the Joker, do I?
Yeah, I can't tell if that's a good day when you're pulling the Joker out. It's a lot of smiles, I assume, but I suppose there's also the madness element there.
Well, there is, I suppose, yes. But I mean, most of the characters I draw, they, you know, I have to some extent inhabit the part of the character I'm drawing.
Brian, there's a big stigma to sort of the civilian kind of fandom around comics of things like even of tracing photographs and the like. Even in the analog days, would you put stuff like the Artograph projector machine to use? Like, did you trace off things like the camera on the Killing Joke and then draw around it? Or
I'm sure I did. I couldn't possibly have drawn that. Just I really can't remember how I did that. Well, I mean, there is a photograph somewhere of me looking in the mirror, pointing that camera at myself. So I obviously clearly, and I did have an Artograph projector, but that was mainly so that I could do my prelim roughs at what we call A4. Do you know what A4 is over there? You have different page sizes there, I think, don't you? Yeah. And having drawn the rough prelim at that size, I then had to put it in the Artograph projector to blow it up to artwork size so that I could. So I was actually tracing my own drawing.
When you would when you would do these preliminary illustrations, would you do the complete perspective at that small size so that you don't have to put the vanishing point far away, or would you handle those parts of the drawing on the big boards?
No, everything. I don't have any to show you at the moment. My prelims are not here at the moment, but no, I would say pretty much I did. My prelims were very, I wish I'd pulled some out in advance of this, but I think I pretty much drew on a small scale everything that would end up full size as the artwork, yeah. Nowadays, of course, with the in Photoshop, there are all kinds of ways of working out perspective. There are probably much easier ways than I use. There's a whole book about digital art, which I wrote the foreword to, actually. and it's full of so many complicated techniques about perspective that I've never even read.
So you use Photoshop for your drawing, not the Dave Gibbons Manga Studio.
I do. Now I'll go on with Dave Gibbons because Dave talked me into getting into the whole Photoshop thing. But Dave has always he's been a great friend of mine for all my career. We're good pals. And he's always been a man who loves new stuff, I would say. He was always finding a great new drawing implement of some sort, but now we're in the era of the computer. He's very good at embracing a new piece of software. I've learned how to use, I spent 10 months learning how to use Photoshop, and I'm so Luddite that I really couldn't be asked to learn how to use Manga Studio or whatever. It's called something else now, I believe, isn't it? Yeah. I tried it, but I mean, there are so many. It's like driving a car. You know, if you're driving a car very fast and you see something coming to you, your fingers and your hand goes automatically to the brake pedal. My hand goes automatically without me thinking to the correct set of keys to get me around Photoshop. But to learn a whole different and new set of keys and a whole different procedure with another piece of software is just something I can't get my head around. So I'm quite happy to stick with Photoshop, and I'll take my cut from Photoshop any time you like. Photoshop.
That's surprising. They're
not paying me anything.
They work with a lot of artists, kind of like as sponsors, and like different ways to, of course, promote their own products through working artists.
I think Dave McKean has some kind of arrangement with Photoshop. He was telling me that he upgrades every time there's an upgrade, he upgrades. My version of Photoshop is CS2, which probably came out around about the time, sometime after the fall of the dinosaur, I think. And I cannot upgrade any of my operating system on my computer, because if I do, Photoshop isn't going to work anymore.
And you take that same computer and put it on the internet? Is that what you're talking to us from?
No, I'm
good.
I'm actually on an iPad at the moment. I've got one of those kind of stalks, where you sort of because somebody said that you need the thing at least on getting a little rickety there. It's got to be at least on eye level, otherwise you just sort of see the underside of people's chins.
Yeah, no matter how skinny a person is, man, everybody has the bullfrog neck when that camera's under their face, man.
You need to grow one of these.
You ever put that computer that you haven't updated on the internet for 2 seconds, man? It's going to be full of worms.
I'm sure it is, yes. Is worms a technical term that I should know about?
Sure, they're endemic to the internet at this point. A hacker puts them out there and they're just floating around waiting to
looking for old computers,
basically.
They're not up to date. Brian, do you draw on that iPad? Have you done anything with like the Apple Pencil and Procreate, anything like that?
No, as I say, I'm very Luddite. I draw in Photoshop. I've tried a few things on the iPad, and I know a lot of people do use the iPad to draw, but I personally haven't. Have you tried it?
Yeah,
I've
done
most people have.
Entire comic on my free comic book day issue a couple years ago. I did completely on my iPad because I'd just gotten the iPad and was like, wow, there's a lot here. I should do a comic on this. And so I tried to do one as a way to, get more comfortable and learn a little bit about it. And it's an impressive tool, like so many of these digital tools are nowadays, including the Wacom's, the Cintiqs, Photoshop, all of this stuff. It kind of blows my mind as somebody that grew up loving ink and trying to figure out how to use a pen nib. It's just, it's amazing, the power of these tools today.
I really should try to learn how to use it. I mean, whenever I go away somewhere, I can't work because I always work on my big computer over there. So, I suppose if I knew if I knew how to work the way you can on the iPad, I would be able to work while away somewhere. But I haven't.
You've mentioned Dave Gibbons a couple of times, and a few of the names from sort of that English comic scene that we all know. Did you talk to Dave or Alan Moore about like Camelot 3000 whenever they started gearing up Watchmen and looking at like 12 issues and a maxi series? Were you comparing notes and talking about that experience from, I mean, you had done like DC's first 12-issue maxi series. Anything that you learned that you passed on to those guys?
Well, most of the 2000 AD artists, well, I say most of them, but our generation of 2000 AD artists used to have a monthly pub night. We used to get together once a month and eat a pizza and compare notes. And also we had the Forbidden Planet signing sessions where Dave Gibbons, Kevin O'Neill, Ian Gibson, Alan Moore, less so, but also he was there also. We would all get together. And of course, artists tend to get together and talk about arty stuff. And I do remember when, I mean, Camelot 3000 started in 1982, 82 to 84. And so I would be showing Dave and the others what I was doing. And when it was over, it was a very, you know, I got a little bonus from DC Comics, and I said, look what I've got from DC Comics. They gave me this for nothing, just for having finished it. But then when Dave was working on Watchmen, he would come along with all kinds of stories about this wonderful new thing that he and Alan were working on, and he would show us pages of it and tell us the story. And so, you know, there was this great sort of enthusiasm, the buzz between a little group of us, you know, the sort of part of the British invasion. Yeah, there was that. I mean, to begin with, you see, I mean, I first started doing something at DC Comics in 1979. It was a few Green Lantern covers and a few very short stories. And there wasn't really that sort of, what's the word? There wasn't really any kind of travel between Britain and America in terms of the comics that were being, there weren't really any Brits working in American comics at the time, possibly with the exception of Barry Windsor Smith, who had actually moved to the States. And so the whole process of working in Britain for DC or Marvel hadn't really got started by then. So it was a fairly new experience. We had the fax machine, so we were able to send roughs to our editors and they could see what we were doing. So it was a bit of a learning process for all of us. So we had a lot to say to each other about it.
It's pretty cool. You could actually like probably blame a little bit of the transatlantic connection for the tardiness of pages, man. I never thought about that. That would almost make me want to move someplace, man, so I could get a couple extra hours in on the board.
I don't know if you get away with that in the digital age, though.
Yeah.
Your window for that probably has closed, Ed.
Yeah, sadly, you're probably right. Brian, there is a rumor that came through, and we might even cut this, man, if it's too weird or whatever. But we did a video talking Batman the Killing Joke, and on some video I was joking. We might have cut it out of that video, but I was joking about finishing some of the Commissioner Gordon illustrations that were cropped off at the panel borders when he's, you know, butt naked and you know, his body's cropped, and like let's see what's on the other side of that panel border. And you know, I just made a joke of that on one of the recordings we did. Somebody got in touch from who worked at a New York comic shop, and this sounds fake, but you can dispel the rumor, man. He said that he saw some pages that were brought in by like Rich Bruning or some you know, DC staff person, and there were some pencil pages that didn't make the final cut, where Joker is doing some things, man, to Commissioner Gordon. Is there any truth to that?
Well, I've never seen them.
Yeah, that's what I figured, man.
There was a central panel where the Joker has Barbara at his mercy, where she was topless. And I was asked to draw an alternative panel, and I think the topless panel does exist somewhere in production somewhere. I don't have the artwork, so I couldn't see it anymore. But this sounds like this is something I've never heard of.
Yeah, just a wives' tale that's been floating around for a while.
I mean, has anyone seen this stuff, or is it just talk? Is it just talk?
Yeah, it was a guy who said he's seen it, but I felt dubious, man. I thought he was taking me for a ride, and now I know
Well,
he was.
I'd like to see it. I must say, when Alan's story came along, I'm not quite sure what was going on with Alan, but there were some things in the story that I thought, I mean, I think he needed to take the story just one step further than the Joker had been taken before, to some extent. But I did think, do we really have to do that to Barbara and Commissioner Gordon? But he's the boss. He wrote the story.
What kind of feedback have you gotten from editors over the years? And we could think of Killing Joke as probably a great one for this question, because I look at your art and it seems so precise. I can't imagine an editor stepping in and saying, redraw this or rethink this panel. Oh. Is that something that has happened? What's been your experience with editorial?
Well, my experience with, sometimes I do rather disgust myself with just how much of a prima donna I must be. But there have been occasions when I have sent in my, I usually I know roughly what's required on the cover, because I've read the story and I sort of put a little asterisk, a big star next to the scene that would make a good cover, or the cover idea would spring from that. And at the beginning, I would then produce about 3 different alternative cover ideas, which I'd send to the editor. After a while, I cut that down to the one, because he or she, mostly he, I suppose, always chose the one that I thought worked the least. And I thought, no, the other one's much better. So I tried to get away with just sending one idea in. But then occasionally it would come to the editor would not like what I'd done. I mean, if I was able to produce, if I was on absolutely the same wavelength as the editor and everybody else, I would be able to come up with something good. But gradually I felt that I was moving into a different wavelength. The editor and I would maybe he wanted something different, and they would say, no, we don't like that. Can you come up with something different? We like it, but can you think of anything better? And after about 3 goes at that, I get a bit fed up. I really don't like that period when I've sent the rough idea in, and then I wait, and I think, does he like it? Maybe he doesn't like it. And after a while, I sort of think, well, I think it's about time I left this, because I think what they want from me, what they want is something different. I mean, I did some, what was it called? Gotham Knights covers, a whole series of them, 20 odd, I can't remember how many. And after a while, I got the impression that they wanted more action covers than I was providing. I'm not really an action cover guy. I like a good idea, but a lot of my characters are not really in action. There's a sort of an intriguing sort of incident going on. But when an editor says, just give me an action shot, I sort of think, what the hell do they want me to draw? Just, what are they doing? And at that point, I tend to think, well, maybe it's time to find something different to do.
I feel like DC they were on the forefront and even very famous for the idea of, like, I don't know what you would call it, like the spec cover or something. Like a cover gets turned in and they write a story around the cover, or that the cool thing you see on that cover might be on in the background of the TV of whatever Batman story or something like that.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you my Julie Schwartz story right at the very beginning of my time at DC Comics. I have had a few little dealings with Marvel, but it's mostly me and DC, because I was a DC collector. I had this huge, complete collection of DC Comics going all the way back to the 50s. And when I first started going to DC, I used to meet Julie Schwartz, who was the legendary editor at DC at the time. And we Brits were just beginning to go over. I think Dave Gibbons had gone over, and I was probably there at the beginning. And Julie rather took a liking to us. I think he liked the way we spoke with our funny accents. And he said to me, look, just, I'm doing Justice League. Can you come up with a cover and maybe a Superman cover, and we'll get somebody to write a story around it. So I did a Superman cover where he was turning into a kind of a beast man. And he printed the thing without any color at all, with just, I think, red eyes. But I also did one where Starro the Conqueror was menacing the Justice League, and they'd all got these little Starros stuck on their faces. And I took that into DC when I went in about 1980, I think. And Julie liked it. And you see, I'd just seen the film Alien, and the face huggers in Alien had made an impression on everybody. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun if Starro the Conqueror was on the cover of the very first Justice League comic in Brave and the Bold in 1960. I don't think he'd been used. He's such a ludicrous character that he hadn't been used since. And I thought, well, he was so iconic, I'll just draw on spec another Starro cover. And Julie liked it and asked me to draw a second cover, just to make it a two-part story. And you may know who wrote that story, but he got somebody to take those two covers and make it into a two-part story. But yeah, that was often the way it went. I think it was the way it went over the years before I got there, during the 50s and 60s. I think quite often somebody would come up with a great-looking cover, and I don't think in those days really the stories mattered a great deal. There was usually a monster, and they required an 8-page story about this alien monster coming along and then being defeated, and that would be it. But yeah, that's the way it went.
You said you had a complete collection of DC comics.
Well, when I say
no longer.
No, I sold it. The whole collection. There must have been 4,000 or 5,000 of them. But I had a complete set of showcase, Justice League, Flash, Atom, Green Lantern, all of those things. Not the Superman, not Superman or Batman, because they would go way before I was born. But also the mystery titles like House of Mystery, House of Secrets, My Greatest Adventure, and I just grew up on all the artists who drew in all of those books. Yeah, and I before parting with it, I scanned the covers of 2,500 of them, so I can instantly view them on my screen now, but the actual collection I sold, yeah, 5 years ago.
Who were some of your favorite artists from that period? Were you an Alex Toth guy in House of Mystery or Q-Bird or?
Well, weirdly enough, I'll show you this. I was just looking through a drawer just now, and can you see that?
Oh yes.
That's the first flap. I mean, that is the 14-year-old me in 1965 trying to draw like Carmine Infantino, and I've got some of the others, and that's I don't know whether this is coming very well over the screen, but that's a Gil Kane, isn't it? That was my great hero at the time when I was 14 and at school, was Gil Kane. And I'll show you this one as well. I mean, this is Ross Andrew and Esposito, reimagined by me, age 14. So I think Gil Kane and Murphy Anderson. I mean, at that age, I had a great friend, Dave Harwood, who was 2 years older than me, who was a big fan of Murphy Anderson. He could draw that smooth ink finish the way Murphy Anderson used to do. And so Gil Kane was my, well, I say mentor. I mean, I was listening to Howard Chaykin. He was actually his apprentice, wasn't he? Howard was Gil's apprentice for quite a while, but I just saw Gil's work in the comics and collected every one and somehow aped his style, but also, quite a few of the other. I mean, one artist I loved from 66 onwards is Bruno Premiani, who was the artist on the original Doom Patrol, written by Arnold Drake. So people like that. And I always have to make this confession: I was never a Jack Kirby fan.
This interview's over. It's like, it's funny.
Goodbye. I'll get my hat. I had a very few of the early Spider-Man. I liked Steve Ditko. I particularly liked his Doctor Strange, and I really liked John Buscema. And I can see why Kirby is the king, but to me, I didn't fall for him as a kid. And when you don't, I grew to appreciate him more as a professional, as an adult. I can see why he's well liked. But all the, you mentioned Alex Toth. I do agree with Howard Chaykin that Alex Toth is the greatest comic artist, American comic artist. I don't know whether you could say world, but, and Howard did say something which, I mean, I can't remember how he said it, but a lot of people say about Alex Toth that his work is simple. And you look at his work and there's just nothing to it. And I can see why people who love certain other artists wouldn't see much in Toth's work, but a lot of artists enjoy the luxury of putting in masses of detail which disguises the fact that their basic understanding of what they're drawing isn't there, because a lot of people confuse detail with good drawing. And I think Toth, without all that unnecessary detail, you could see just how he understood light and shadow and placing and composition and storytelling. And sometimes his work looked a little cartoony, but somehow everything you need to know about comics is in that stuff. I mean, and he would have come out of the Milt Caniff and Noel Sickles sort of school. I don't know whether it's literally a school, but out of that sort of heritage, really. What do you think?
I agree totally. Thank you for saying all of that. I'm a big Toth fan, so that's a
man.
great thing for me to hear. I appreciate it.
Good man. I never met him. I mean, I understand he was not the easiest man to. Did you ever meet him?
No, I did not. I never met him. I never wrote to him. I regret that. No. At least not writing a letter and saying, what his work meant to me. But yeah, a lot of stories about that not going well when people did meet
really
or work with him.
I mean, don't quote me on this, but I did hear one story about he threatened to throw some editor out of the window because they had a disagreement. I've never gone that far, but a friend of mine, John Hitchcock, from I think he's in North Carolina, somewhere like that, had a great friendship with Toth and published a book of his letters. I mean, apparently he was a very generous letter writer. And his letters were always beautiful. His lettering was so beautiful as well as his drawing. In a way, and one of my greatest pleasures in life was that I was inside Batman Black and White #4, which had one of his very, very best covers for comics on the front of it.
Might be one of his last pieces of work, at least for DC.
It was very late, yes. Yeah.
Great story too, by the way, Brian. You wrote that one. There's precious little comics out there that you've written, at least in sort of the more mature period of your career.
In the mainstream.
Right.
I will just at this point plug the fact that I draw and write a thing called The Actress and the Bishop. I'll send you a link to that if possible. I used to also write a thing called Mr. Mamoulian, which was a sort of stream of consciousness bit of sort of autobiographical nonsense, which when I write, I haven't got a head for superheroes and kind of mainstream stuff at all. So I couldn't possibly be but in the case of Batman and the Joker, I do see in them a kind of yin and yang, kind of two aspects of one brain. And this particular story that came out in the form of, I call it The Innocent Guy, was a sort of an expression of some questions that came up in my mind about those two characters. Well, actually, the Joker isn't in that, is he? But came out of my mind. It was partly a homage to a lot of the things that I'd read and seen in Batman comics from a long time ago. I mean, I love Dick Sprang's work. He was a Batman artist from the 50s, and I was able to insert a few bits of Dick Sprang into. I mean, the thing about drawing like was it 8 pages? I can't remember how many pages. Is that regardless of what the story is about, as the writer, you can actually insert into the story all the stuff you want to draw. I mean, when Alan wrote The Killing Joke, he didn't know what I want to draw. So this little short allowed me to, I can draw a giant typewriter. I can draw the penguin. I can draw Batman being killed. I can draw all kinds of fun things that just, which a writer wouldn't know I want to draw. But yeah, was there a question in there? I really can't remember. I got carried away.
Listen, we're not chasing the conversation. It's just a flowing thing. What do you got, Jimmy?
Okay.
I wanted to do one more bit on Alex Toth. Brian, you went to school, I believe you studied graphic design. I wonder if that influences the way you appreciate Alex Toth's work. You know, I think he's often talked about as being this great designer, probably in terms of his compositions. Is that something that you know, maybe you identify because of your background in graphic design?
No, I did 5 years in art schools doing all kinds of things, some of which was supposed to be graphic design, but nobody in the art schools knew anything about comics. I wrote my college thesis on Neil Adams, and nobody in the college had ever heard of him. This was 1973. Everything I learnt about comics really came out of looking at comics. I learned nothing about how to draw comics from this so-called graphic design course I was on. I learned about typography. I even remember learning how to do arc welding. You know, we we had to have a stab at the printing process, typesetting, and all that sort of stuff. None of which, well, I mean, I suppose during a period at an art school, regardless of what you're doing, you do get exposed to a lot of stuff that could be loosely described as art. So, you know, I do often rather pretentiously insert bits of that knowledge of, you know, that period as an art student, which, you know, I'm still an art student in a way. I mean, we all kind of look at art and learn from it. And again, I've forgotten exactly what your question was, but a lot of the influences and sort of things I'd come across in the world of art, which I still do, they do influence occasionally what I do. I mean, I remember doing 2 covers, both, one was Animal Man and one was The Invisibles, I think, which were a complete rip-off of a surrealist painting by Fuseli of, it has a sort of woman lying on a bed and there's a kind of a gremlin sitting on her chest. And that was really taken from a piece of 19th century surrealist art. And there are other things of that. I've tried to creep in a bit of Francis Bacon, you know, the artist Francis Bacon, and stuff of that sort. So I suppose my period doing all of that has sort of leached into my work as a comic artist. Yeah,
that's really cool.
Makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, like one of the things that I was thinking about, and I had some loose kind of question about just composing images, and it seems like you, in a roundabout way, sort of just answered that with, you know, the things that you've seen and absorbed over time.
You mentioned being, you know, we're all still students of art. Are you looking at any contemporary comics or comic book artists? Any favorites out there today?
I'm afraid when asked about that, I'm very ignorant, because I don't. The only comic work I see these days is via Facebook, because I don't. I'm nowhere near a comic shop. I do try to keep tabs on what other artists who I know through mainly Facebook. I suppose some of them are on Instagram, which is I've recently got onto. I'm probably terribly behind what's going on. You know, occasionally I get is it the Harvey Kurtzman Awards form comes through, and I go through the list. I've never heard of any of these people, you know. I mean, I have a few artists who remain absolutely top favorites of mine. I mean, Jim Woodring is a huge favorite of mine. There's something brand new came on Facebook only today by Jim that I love his work. It's just inexplicable. And it's not technique driven. You don't look at it and think, isn't that beautifully drawn? He's not, it's like he's not interested in that. He just draws what he sees, which is just complete madness. But as for other stuff, I'm terribly ignorant of what's going on.
Woodring's a fascinating artist for you to say, because
yeah,
he does feel like another guy who has an amazing line, very precise inking style and everything. Yes. And I wouldn't think of him next to Brian Bolland until you say it, and then it makes perfect sense. Yeah, that's a great pool.
But I mean, you wouldn't compare the two of us other than just in the line. I mean, he's got that beautiful wavy line. It's always like that. And I suppose I do have a fairly consistent line.
Precision is the term that I think with both of you two.
Well, that's very kind. Thank you very much. But I mean, when you look at Jim's work, you don't think that's precise. You think, God, that's fucking weird. Although when you see him talking in a lecture or something, he's had a very I don't want to slander him in public like this, but I think he's had a fairly difficult mental journey, hasn't he? I think he's got mental problems, but I didn't put that terribly well. But his talks are very interesting and well spoken.
In the various interviews, like I've read with you, sort of building up to this conversation, there would always be these very eclectic tastes that you would put out there that I would never associate with you, probably because of the aforementioned precision of your work. Musical groups like the Residents and stuff that feel very, very kind of like out there, avant-garde.
Well, yeah, that's my other my other love is well, I suppose, I mean, it's kind of a little bit pretentious to say strange music. It's not at all strange, but I've got my own particular journey through the music of my teenage and adult life, and it does seem to have been a little bit left field. I mean, my earliest love was Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, and then Captain Beefheart. I mean, that was even as early as the 60s. And then I got very seriously keen on the Residents, and Ronaldo and the Loaf are a sort of British fan spin-off of the Residents, really. And I've become quite pally with, well, both of them, actually. I know members of both groups. And then in the 80s, I discovered a group called Negativland, who are from San Francisco, I think, and they're a sort of cut and paste kind of collage people. And you can't really call them music. There's a musical element, but there's also a kind of journalistic element and an element of sort of audio collage going on with them. And a lot of really sort of, I do really like people who, there are people who are just noise. I mean, people like Nurse with Wound is just one man from Ireland. Have you heard of these people?
Yes.
Excellent. Stephen Stapleton, he's a fellow from Ireland. But I mean, I love people like Tiny Tim. Tiny Tim was this sort of novelty act in the late 60s. And I loved his first album. But there are other things. I mean, a current favorite of mine is a group called Fuck Buttons. Have you heard of it?
Great title.
Fuck Buttons. It's a good. They actually had one of the pieces of music going on in the 2012 London Olympics. One of the tunes going on while the teams were walking out was this tune called Olympians by Fuck Buttons. And I think that Fuck Buttons is two guys, and I think they've recently split into two separate outfits. But also I'm very, I mean, I could bore you to death with all this, but I thanks to Robert Crumb and the Cheap Suit Serenaders, I discovered that I've always loved that sort of rinky-dinky, old-timey music from way, way back, sort of novelty acts and so on. And I got well keen on sort of string bands from the 1920s and sort of the very earliest period of what became known as country music. People like Vernon Dalhart and Frank Crumit and a fellow called Gid Tanner and his Skillet Lickers. And later in, this is where Howard Chaykin and I have a mutual taste in something, and we both quite like Western swing, which is people like Bob Wills and Milton Brown and the Tune Wranglers. And anyway, I could go on. You've got to stop me. For God's sake, stop me.
Were you inspired by, oh, go ahead, Jimmy.
No, please.
I was just going to ask, like, are you inspired by any kind of comic book equivalents of like a Nurse with Wound or something that's like more eclectic art style, something from the underground, Richard Corbin?
Oh God, yeah, yes, Richard. I mean, oh God, yes, I love Richard Corbin's work. You know, the late Richard Corbin. I love Den. I was very sorry that Den no longer had a penis. You know, the thing, the thing that was astonishing about Den at the beginning with Corbin was that he had this huge dick, which was subject to the laws of gravity. It was fascinating, and I do, you know, I'd like to. I've got a new character I'm going to come up with. Just possibly, I'll put it on the internet. Who's naked and naked. He's going to be like a gremlin of some sort, but he's got to be sort of anatomically correct. Or there's really no point in him. But yes, Richard Corbin. Who else? Oh yeah, I mean, I've got to still have a pile of the undergrounds. Robert Wilson, is he? Oh, I got his name right. There was
Williams. Robert Williams.
Robert Williams. Yes. Can you name the thing he used to draw? Because I can't remember.
Kuchiku.
Yes, something like that.
in Zap Comics.
Yes, and I was very keen on the Hernandez brothers' Love and Rockets, but that was, you know, that's not your mainstream, but it's beautifully drawn, isn't it? Beautifully written and drawn. Name some other stuff. I can't remember it all.
Well, you know, like one of the weird kind of DC connections would be like a Dan Clowes who was chasing that very clean ink line.
Yes, and then of course there's what's he called? Not Dan Clowes. The
Burns.
I forgot.
Charles Burns.
Yes, Burns. John. Is it what's his first name? Charles. Charles Burns. Yeah, I love his work too. Yeah, haven't read
another
much
one
of
of
it,
those. Another one of those inkers that I think of in your class of being extremely in control of the tools that he's using. You know, I think mostly a brush, but having that just precision. You know, is the word that comes to mind.
Yes, but I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I mean, the first thing I think of when I see Woodring and Charles Burns is not what a slick technique they have, but the strange, I mean, to me, it's the content of the stuff that's in. I mean, yeah, we all need to be able to have some technical ability, but it's what you draw with that technical ability that is, to me, more of interest. Do you know what I mean? I mean,
sure.
I don't
vision, like how the way they see the world or express themselves.
Yes, that's right. I mean, there are some people who draw beautifully, but I've not ever seen anything. I mustn't go along this route because I'm almost at the point of naming names here, and I won't do that.
You know,
anyway, yeah.
Bernie Wrightson was one of those famous guys when he would talk about his ink process, where there's more ink on a piece of scrap paper than on the final boards. It's almost like, you know, he's twisting and twirling the brush on a piece of scrap paper, and then he's getting 2 or 3 solid lines of ink, has to dip it again, do that whole bit all over again in order to build his pages. Was that your experience when you would ink because of that slick, you know, ink line you had? It looks like a lot of toil went into getting that precise line.
No, not really. I think I've always been very, okay. When I was at school, I did what we call A levels, which is advanced level exams. And I ended up just doing 2. I dropped out of English literature because I couldn't get on with Shakespeare. And I ended up doing 2 A levels, art and technical drawing. Technical drawing is just the technical ability to draw a truncated cone, you know, that sort of stuff in 3D. And I got a B in art and an A in technical drawing. And I think there's something about that I think I've always been able to, I think notably, I don't know, notably, I very rarely use whiteout. When I used to draw masses of hair, I would always draw the black bits between the hair because I couldn't bear to put, so I think I've always been fairly, I knew where the line was going to go and I didn't fluff around with it. I think I've seen the way some people draw in pencil. Some people draw in pencil and they just, to quote somebody like, was it Miro? He used to say that art was taking a line for a walk. Some people can draw with lines like that, and I think there are people who take a line for a walk, and there are people who I call fluffers, and they just sort of fluff around a little bit and try to get a. I mean, I could show you my pencil drawings, but I don't have them to hand here. But I think I've always known exactly where the line should go, even when it goes in the wrong place. I don't have any choice as to where it's going to go. I just put it there.
Do you visualize your images? I'm not sure exactly how to ask this because we all visualize our images before we draw, but there are people who will draw straight in ink because they're able to really clearly see an image in their head and you know, sort of confidently go to that line. Do you work that way? Do you have a very clear, are you drawing that picture in your head first?
Somebody asked me that question and I really didn't know how to answer that because I haven't got a picture in my mind of what something looks like. I mean, I've just drawn a couple of Swamp Thing covers, and when I said, "Can I do another one?" because I had an image in my, well, I say I've got an image in my mind, but I just had this idea of him doing that, and the fingers turning into a tree, and I knew that's what I wanted to draw. And I ended up, but I didn't have an actual visual in my mind of what it looked like. I just knew that that's the image I was going to end up drawing. And lo and behold, it turned, well, I always say turned up on paper because that's the way things used to be. But of course, that's the way I'd show it to you, but it's not been announced yet. I do have the last sort of Swamp. I've rather enjoyed doing Swamp Thing. I'd love to be able to try to imitate Bernie's style. If I get another chance at it, I'm going to see if I can try to do a Bernie. But at the moment, it looks like a Bolland, I'm afraid.
What's the smallest pixel brush you allow yourself to use, man? Because that's always the danger, right? When you're playing digitally, you could really zoom in close. And I know people always have a number. Usually the one that I hear is 10 pixels. I won't go less than 10 pixels because then it's too microscopic.
No. Well, okay, technical stuff then. I do my covers print size, but at 600 dpi, dots per inch. And I have 2 screens of the same image, one that big with just the tiny bit I'm working on, and I blow that up to 200%. So I just have an eye or something. And then on the corner of the screen, I have a small image of the whole page so that you know that when you're drawing a line that's too fine, if you see the whole page, can you see where my figure's going?
Yep.
You can tell that nobody can really see that thing. And I occasionally work at 5, actually. But the thing about working at 10 is that you can do what you used to be able to do with a brush, which is the pressure will allow the line to swell. I was watching a tutorial that Rob Liefeld or somebody was doing about how to draw like me. And he did this thing where he showed you how to do a feathered line, and he put his brush. No, I think he was working digitally too, and he put his thing on the surface, and just it started off thick and just it just tailed off. And I wanted to go, no, I don't do it like that. I start at the thin end and gradually put more I start at the thin end and gradually put more pressure on until it gets thicker, and so I'm drawing a line that is probably 6 inches long on my screen or more, but it's going to end up just like a little blur on the finished. So 10 basically. I'm doing a piece of work at the moment which has got a lot of diagonal. It's a black and white thing, and it's got a lot of diagonal shaded lines because it's a copy of an artist from the 1950s, and I'm using a 10 pixel brush. No, I use a pencil in Photoshop. I use a 10 pixel pencil for that.
Do you create your own brushes and stuff in Photoshop?
I've created some, but I mainly just use the circular one. I mean, yes, but my signature is a brush, and I just go beep, and there's my signature. And I've got some glints which I created if I want to put a glint on a piece of metal or something, and that's just a brush I created. Yes, I have. Do you work in Photoshop or any of these other things yourself?
Yeah, sure, but not really to draw. I
No.
still the drafting board back there isn't a green screen.
Oh, I see. I can just see it over your head. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, pretty much just to get print ready files and stuff.
Yeah. I must find out what it is you two guys do, because you don't just interview people, you actually draw stuff, don't you? Create stuff.
My comics are so vulgar. I wouldn't inflict them upon you.
So vulgar. Oh, I don't mind a bit of that.
He has Batman getting a headshot and does Killing Joke, Ed.
Heck of a head wound. I was thinking about making a zine of the great head wounds in comics, and that Batman head wound is up there.
Brian, are you creating new Actress and Bishop strips or Mr. Mamoulian strips? Are you creating new ones?
I am, yes. I did a new Actress and the Bishop 14-page story, which I don't currently have a publisher for, so I put it straight on Facebook. And well, I've recently started with Instagram, but I don't get Instagram. Somebody said, why would anybody want to look at a page of artwork the size of a postage stamp basically on your phone? But I've got another Actress and the Bishop story written. It's all done in silly rhyme, and the Actress and the Bishop go shopping. And I think I've got another one coming up in the future where they decide to go nudist. So that's. But the thing is, I mean, I come up with these stories. I mean, the one where they go shopping, they go to what we call a supermarket, a store, and it's all. It all takes place in the kind of vegetable aisle or the kind of canned goods aisle, and it's one thing to write, and another thing to actually draw them. Every panel's got to be in the aisle of a what do you call it? Not a supermarket. What do you call that?
A store. Supermarket.
Grocery store.
Yeah. A grocery store. Yeah, they're set upon by zombies and vampires and witches and things like that.
In the grocery store.
Of course, yes.
It's fantastic.
And as for Mr. Mamoulian, I occasionally do, and I keep thinking I'll bring him back, but I've got this new Gremlin character I'm going to start drawing, and I don't really have a print outlet at the moment. Quite nice to collect all of these things in a book, but I don't really have any. I don't know how to self-publish. And just putting things out on the internet is just so instant, it goes out to people, who are interested. And, if people are not interested, they don't look. And as soon as I've finished a page, it can just go out there.
There's a real excitement to that, I find, finishing a page and being able to get feedback, being able to get, I mean, the thing about working, right away. The thing about working for a proper publisher like DC or somebody is that I can't actually show people a thing until
they've solicited it. I mean, this latest Swamp Thing cover, I only finished it 2 days ago, but I can't show it to anybody until it's solicited, can I?
Well, you could give us sneak peeks, and we could promise not to let anybody else see sort of the fringe benefits of running the channel.
That's very true.
Wait a second.
Give you a plug, Brian, for anybody that knows your DC work. For example, Bolland Strips is a book that collects some of that Actress and Bishop and Mr. Mamoulian for anyone who's looking for some of your more personal work.
That's right. Yes, there is one. There's also there's also this, which is quite a good edition. Somebody was very kind enough to put Illustrators magazine. It's a good magazine full of a lot of very good artists. So how I managed to creep in there, I don't know. But £25. That I don't know how much that would be in American dollars. But yes, there is also that.
Brian, that back cover to that Illustrators magazine, like that lighting is so accurate, and you've captured that so many times. Like, would that be an example of you setting up some friends and posing an image to get the lighting like that, or is that coming off the top of the head?
That was completely improvised. I don't know anybody who looks like either of those people. Unfortunately, I don't know any. I mean, that could be me. I don't know who. I mean, while I was drawing Wonder Woman, I remember I was buying a lot of Vogue magazines because there were one or two models that I thought now Wonder Woman would look like that. And I remember Stephanie Seymour was a model at the time in the 90s, I suppose. And I think I fashioned Wonder Woman's face from photos of Stephanie Seymour. I wanted to get that nose shape the same. But no, most of these are. That's actually a Serbian edition of Bolland Strips. But again, I don't really know anybody who looks like that.
You didn't sit Mick McMahon in a little Pope hat to do that piece?
No. That's the French edition there. There you go. I don't know whether these images are coming across on your screen at all, are they?
Yeah, really good. Well. Beautiful. We talked with Jeff Darrow last week, and he was describing Dave Stevens' process and visiting the studio and seeing work in various states of completion. And this is just me thinking about like your Wonder Woman covers in relation to Dave Stevens' work, where he's doing kind of like, he's drawn a woman in pinup style, and there are whole bits that aren't even drawn yet because he's waiting to look for reference of a specific angle of a forearm or a certain kind of like rib position. Like, do you get that deep with reference, or a lot of it, could come off the top of the head? With the Wonder Woman cover specifically, I guess.
No, I don't really think I use. I mean, there are exceptions. There was one, I can't throw it up on screen, but there was one where it was just a close-up of Wonder Woman, and she's got the just a big close-up like that, and she's got the Joker grin, and she's got the green hair, which I swiped completely from a photo of an actress. But generally speaking, I'm not really using reference most of the time. I mean, I've got to try to be honest here, but I can't, but I do occasionally, but mostly I have to make it up. And I do find that overly copied from models' work can look a bit tiring to look at. I think it's much. I mean, I love the work of Mick McMahon, whose work doesn't look remotely realistic. It's wonderful. I love his work, but an artist who slavishly can copy a model, a live model, it's lacking something. I think something that's a sort of improvised straight onto the page appeals to me more. I do love Dave's work, Dave Stevens. Did he use models a lot? He must have used models quite a lot, mustn't he?
The way it's been described is like a lot of reference for everything, to just nail down, you know, the complete 3D kind of image.
I mean, another artist I love is Adam Hughes. I mean, for me, he was the best Wonder Woman and sort of good girl artist, you know, with Catwoman and all the rest. And I love his work. And I think he uses models, doesn't he? I think I probably met one or two people who have modeled for him. Valerie Perez, I think, modeled for him occasionally. Who else? Oh yes, Frank, is it Cho? Frank Cho?
Yes.
Does he use models, or can he just make the whole thing up, do you think?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know that answer.
A terrifically talented artist, wasn't he? Another artist who I latterly discovered was John Paul Leon. Mm-hmm. Have I pronounced the name right?
I think so.
You asked me if there was anybody recently anything I was looking at recently, and I only latterly discovered his work. It was wonderful work, wasn't it?
Very good with spotting blacks and light and shadow.
Yes, I mean, he could create an entire environment. I remember there was one picture of a library. Now, whether he had reference to a library with ladders and sort of walkways and so on and so forth, and also there was one where I think Superman is kind of stopping a train going along an elevated train track. Oh God, I couldn't even begin to know how to draw a thing like that. Anyway, I've digressed. I've just remembered another, you know, somebody else.
That's good. Any of those memories pop up, please interject.
Okay.
I have a question about, do you think of illustration and comics as separate things? You know, when you're doing a cover, it might be classified as illustration. I don't know if there's a distinction for you between the two.
Sometimes I think that I'm actually I'm a technical illustrator, sort of masquerading as a comic book artist. I think that's what I am, really. I mean, I can draw sequential art, but it takes me forever, and now I prefer to just do single images. But I think I'm an illustrator who just happens to work in something remotely like a comic book art style. What do you think of that?
Well, what makes the illustration different? You know, you still do a lot of images that are fantastic, and you're certainly lighting them in these fantastic ways. You know, I just wonder if there's a mindset there, if there's something in your mind that says this is different than.
I think almost by definition, a comic book artist has to be quick. And I think, you know, and I'm not quick. I mean, you know, I'm now that I'm retired, really, I can spend as long as I want doing anything. But I mean, when I look at my early work, when I was a comic book artist, there's a sort of freedom and looseness in it, which I like the look of, which I don't have now. And I think some of the artists I really like, I like the fact that they really haven't really struggled with it, that they have got it down on paper and then they've gone on to the next page. And there's a kind of pleasure in seeing something like that, which is different from something which is, you can see, oh God, they've really struggled with this, I think. What do you think?
Do you think of yourself as a perfectionist?
I don't, because I can see things even on the wall behind you that I could have done a lot better. I go through periods when I look at my work and think, my God, he's clever. You know, I look at my early work and think, what a talented young fella he must have been. And one friend of mine, Joe Melchior, who was an artwork collector and dealer, I said, what is it you like about this artwork? Why do you collect artwork? And he said, because it's like magic. And I sort of had to think, I suppose if you if you're not somebody who draws, the fact that another person can put something like this on a piece of paper is like a magic trick, isn't it? You sort of think, how do they do it? And I suddenly had this terrible fear that the magic was going to just go one day and I wouldn't be able to pull off the trick. Now I've forgotten how that relates to your question.
No, this is all great. The magic thing's interesting. When you were talking about, at the beginning of this conversation, we were talking about your Judge Dredd Apex collection and how you might not have that reaction to seeing original art that a lot of collectors do. And I thought it is a little bit like when you learn a magician's trick, although I don't know that original art actually shows too many of those tricks, but it's still a little bit of seeing behind the curtain. So that's kind of interesting.
I suppose.
That magic analogy. I was curious too about your scripts that you write for yourself and how detailed those scripts are. You were talking about a 14-page script you have for Actress and Bishop. What's one of your scripts look like? How detailed? How much do you plan in that script form?
Well, I mean, there is one rule in comics, and that is don't show and tell, isn't it? I mean, a long time ago, even the comics I grew up on, you'd get a panel and it had somebody punches somebody in the face, and there'd be a caption at the top that said, somebody punches somebody in the face. You'd get a, that if you're drawing a scene, you don't need to describe the scene in words as well as in pictures. And in the case of the Actress and the Bishop, it exists it doesn't follow any rules that apply to the world of comics. It starts off as a rhyme. I'm out mowing the lawn, and I suddenly think of a 4-line rhyme, because it all has to be done in stupid rhyme, and then I realized that it doesn't actually. I'm not even. I mean, if you look at Alan Moore's script in The Killing Joke, for instance. He saw everything in pictures. I'm sure he directed the whole thing. He said, like, we'll have a 6-panel page here, and in the top first one, they're in a bar room, and so he wrote it. I don't know whether you ever read any of the script, but the visuals are part of his storytelling. And but with my thing, it would work just as easily if you just read the rhyme on paper without any pictures. But since they are visual characters, I then have to go and draw them. But if I were doing a proper thing, in the case when I wrote and drew An Innocent Guy, I wrote it in the form of drawn prelims. So I didn't write it as a script. I wrote it as I was drawing it, I think. I suddenly thought, right, we want a giant typewriter here. So I drew the typewriter, and then I wrote the dialogue to go with it. So I didn't actually type it out. So each particular thing really is done in a different way, because I'm not a comic book writer. I have a few little projects that when I get round to drawing this gremlin character, this anatomically accurate gremlin character, it's all going to be done in an imaginary type, an imaginary alphabet. All the conversations and all the dialogue will be written in a typeface that I will have invented, which won't be real. So again, you see, that's something which is done completely differently. I haven't even started this thing yet.
Can you give some hints as to what that's going to be? Is this a multi-page comic? Is it?
No, I can't really. I've got two things I've got to do at the moment. I've got to do the cover of in Britain, I grew up. In fact, there are whole loads of people I really love to have plugged. If it had time, people I grew up on. There was.
I do want to hear those names, by the way.
Okay. As a 13-year-old, I loved a newspaper strip called Jeff Hawke, written by Sid Jordan, who is. He started the thing in 1956, I think, or even 55, and it was a science fiction strip. And I had the pleasure of drawing a few episodes of that in 1977. But also another one that I loved was called Carol Day by an artist called David Wright. And she was a rather glamorous model. And it was all done in 50s and then later 60s style. And it had a slightly, what's the term? There was one story where there was a human face pressed into the wet sand on a beach. So it had a slightly occasional supernatural element to it. And they're collecting some of those stories. And I've been asked to do a cover. And I'm trying to draw it as if David Wright was drawing the cover and not me. So I've also been asked to do a tribute page to Terry and the Pirates. Dean Mullaney asked me to do something to celebrate Milcaniff's Terry and the Pirates, and I'm just drawing that. So if I get a bit of spare time, I'll start this nameless Gremlin character. But I couldn't tell you how long. It may even be 2 pages. I don't know. I'll see how it goes. Because it'll look like a story with people talking to each other, but you won't have a clue what they're saying. They might be making a few sort of expressions like that, but you won't know what it is they're saying to each other. That's all I can tell you.
One of the things I'm looking forward to with the Apex edition of your Judge Dredd work is seeing some evolution to that line, because I've got many of those progs, and from the earliest ones, up to your departure to DC, and there's some very interesting like stipple pointillism technique in some of those early strips and things. I'm hoping that some of that stuff is collected in there, and we're really seeing your ink line evolve, like as presumably you see more and more stuff in print or something, and see how your ink line reacts on the paper or something. That's like one of the old adages that I remember hearing some veterans talk about, where it's like, the comic isn't finished until you see it in print. And what they often meant was you got to see how those crosshatch lines react to the paper and see if you need to space them out a little bit more or something like that. So that's something that I'm hoping we get to see in that Apex edition.
When I started out as all of us, people like Dave Gibbons and me, we were the new wave in a way, and there were all these elder statesmen in the world of comics, people like Frank Hampson and Frank Bellamy, who we looked up to, and they were the people, along with Gil Kane and some of those others, American people, that we saw as our mentors, even though we'd never met them. And one, Frank Bellamy, who drew for Eagle comic, he had a stipple effect technique, and I've actually got the artwork to the very first cover I drew for 2000 AD in 1977, and as you can see, can you see that?
Yes,
so
we
I
can.
was that's going to be in the book. I had to scan this thing in 6 parts because it's just too big to go in my scanner, but you're right, you just have to sort of feel your way and just see what technique you can do in the time. But yeah, I look forward to you observing the whatever progress I might have made, whether I made any or not.
Would you draw bigger proportion than the other cartoonists? Like,
No.
Did you do
No.
a Killing Joke on DC paper?
Yes, I did. Yes, I think I thought I had them here, but I'll tell you what I do have here. I've got. I'm sorry, you're seeing getting a wonderful view of the top of my head at the moment. But
I mean, I'm looking at those bookshelves. I'm wondering if that one set is those Crumb sketchbooks, or is that what those are? Like the kind of Manila series? No.
No, I've got no Crumb here. Did you say Crumb series? Did you say?
Yeah, there was the German Crumb sketchbooks that have a kind of spine like that set you got right there.
I hope you don't mind me going away from the screen for a bit. I mean, I've got all kinds of things here. I mean, I've got this.
Oh yeah,
that's a good one. I think it's actually got a CD in it, hasn't it? Somewhere.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
says in the
is
top
that,
corner.
yeah, it's got some nice music in there. I've got all kinds of things. I don't really have any crumb apart from that. I don't know whether this makes very good television, does it?
Oh man, this is our favorite part. Very often we have to cut this part out just because people are like, don't let anybody know that I have this.
I've got, I mean, I was going to show you this. I mean, I've got the bits of artwork like that. This is not crumb. This is the story you were talking about earlier. And this is,
Yeah, from
I have
Batman Black and
managed
White.
Yeah, that's right. In a second. Oh yeah, this here's the giant typewriter scene that I was very keen to draw. Yeah, that I don't know whether that's there's no talk of that being in a. How does that come across on screen? Okay.
Yeah, really great. So
I was told, by the way, when I wrote that nobody in the States would know what a brolly was, which is our word for an umbrella. An abbreviation of umbrella. What else? Is there anything else I can show you that I've got in the room here? You want to see?
You know, I don't know what's off camera, man, but if you have some cool stuff, I'm happy to see. That Batman Black and White piece. So that wasn't drawn digitally then. So those aren't printouts.
No, that's artwork. That's actually artwork.
So you were applying some Zipatone.
I've always used Zipatone. Yeah, we call it Letratone over here, but I've always loved Zipatone. It was always a great treat to sort of cut it out with a scalpel and put it on.
Well, man, when we see pages like that, black and white, man, it makes sense for you to be doing like a little Milt Caniff tribute piece, because that's got the chiaroscuro built into it, man, with the heavy blacks and all that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you see, the thing is, sorry, this is maybe going on too long, but British comics were mostly in black and white. We didn't have the color. 2000 AD had a colored cover and a colored center spread, but we grew up on a lot of comic art that was just black and white. And so we had, to begin with, had to learn how to tell the story and where just the black ink on the white paper was sufficient. I mean, one of my absolute, and I must plug him too, one of my favorite artists was, and I have trouble pronouncing his name, but I always call him Jesus Blasco, who was a Spanish artist who drew the Steel Claw in a comic called Valiant. He was a man who used a lot of photo reference. So, you know, being able to know where to put the black and the white was an essential part of learning how to do what we did. And I think, I don't know, maybe I've got this wrong, but I think a lot of people who draw superheroes don't have to learn that, because they can just draw the outlines and people fill in the color. I mean, Alex Toth was a great master at chiaroscuro. He could pull off a beautiful looking thing in black and white without any need for color.
Have you got into any Japanese comics? You know, the majority of those are black and white, and you know, some are exceptionally rendered.
I haven't really. I loved what was it? Was it Akira? Was it called Akira? That wonderful Otomo, was that?
Yes.
I remember buying that, and I remember being absolutely astonished by some of the. I don't really know any of the names. I remember buying a Japanese thing, and of course you have to read it from right to left, and it was just a story about fishing. There was some people on a fishing boat just fishing, and it was the energy and explosiveness of just pulling a fish out of the water was just. That's weird. I just got a little sign come up on the bottom of my screen that said you are about to raise your hand. Have you ever seen that? Anyway, I don't know what it was called, but I'm not a great fan of. Is it anime? Do you call it anime? I find the jerky frame frequency a bit off-putting. it's not as smooth as Western, I suppose, Western animation, is it? And I don't like those big round eyes. It's a convention that really goes all the way back to Astro Boy, I suppose, but I do find that a bit annoying.
We've had some some Deadline magazine coverage on the channel, and I wonder, you know, those kids are like the generation like directly after you guys, essentially.
Yeah.
And your name would certainly be blasted on the cover. They would interview you here or there or something like this. Do you have any interactions with people like Brett Ewan, Steve Dillon, Jamie Hewlett? There were those the Tankerel cover was an impeccable piece, but I wonder if you have any anecdotes or stories about those guys.
I've got a little bit of artwork to show you. I love Tank Girl. You ever see that one? That was when I drew for DC. I think Tank Girl's great. Well, I mean, I noticed that you interviewed Brendan recently, Brendan McCarthy. Yes, we used to get together regularly at comic marts and things of that sort. And of course, there are some people you gravitate towards more than others. I didn't know Brendan or Brett Ewins terribly well. I mean, the thing is, Mick McMahon, Dave Gibbons, and Ian Gibson, started at 2000 AD right from the very beginning. And I think Brendan was there quite early on. But I didn't get to know them terribly well. And there are some later artists like Duncan Fagredo, who terrific artist, Duncan, lovely fellow. And whenever I see him, it's a treat to spend time with him, but we never really got to know each other. Oddly, I mean, I got to know, to some extent, I got to know American artists a lot better. I spent quite a bit of time with Frank Miller. Frank used to come to my flat in London, and we would just go out into sort of the East End of London after dark and just wander around Ripper country. And I sort of walk him around the sort of spooky lanes of London at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I spent time with him and his girlfriend at the time. And Walt Simonson I got to know. And I mean, briefly met Steve Ditko at the DC offices. And I sort of got to know quite well Julie Schwartz and Ross Andrew and people of that sort. Seems a bit generic, really. people, luminaries like that, I got to know. I think because it was such a treat to actually go over from where I live to New York and meet these legends, that they made somehow more of an impact on me than my homegrown pals, really.
Can we go back to that Tankerel piece that you just showed?
I was thinking the same thing.
Because it sounded like there's a piece of tracing paper over top of that, which would suggest that that's a piece of original artwork, which would make me curious.
Everything I'm showing you here is original artwork, yes.
Okay.
What's the color medium on that?
That was the question.
Let's have a look. It's acrylic ink with acrylic paint, some airbrush. I think the legs would have been airbrushed, the flesh would have been airbrushed. My wife, Rachel Burkett, used to do some work on some of my full color work. I've got another one here somewhere, if you've got a moment. Which
we have a moment.
Are you sure you have a moment?
This is such a treat, man.
Yes. When you did those Tank Girl pieces, are you thinking about like Jamie Hewlett's art? That last cover, I saw some real, I don't know, little signatures that I would associate with his work, like some of his marker coloring, where you have white highlights and things.
I'm not really. I mean, the characters are obviously Jamie's characters, aren't they? I mean, that funny little. I mean, I drew this quite a while ago, so I can't remember who these people are. But that funny little creature is it on the left for you? I don't know.
Yes.
It's all a bit sort of mirror.
I'll tell you, there's a funny creature on the left and right.
Well, the guy with the big ears is Booger. I remember that. Right. He was a kind of human kangaroo. Now, I'll tell you what. You know that you were talking about music. That image on the cushion there is the logo for the band Ween. Do you know the band Ween?
Yes, sir.
Who they split up some time ago, but I think they're back together again, aren't they? I don't know.
That's so cool. Brian, can you show us that other cover? It didn't pop up on screen because we were jibber jabbering, and people at home won't get to see it.
I mean, I can hold anything up you want. I mean, I've got a little. I sort of prepared a little bit for this, just in case you wanted to. People don't want to spend their time looking at my ugly face. People are a little bit more interested in artwork. But I was very pleased with this one. I like this one because I don't know. I just thought that's Tank Girl. She's a fantastic character, and she wasn't really terribly well served in the film, was she?
I can't believe that's original art. I'm stunned. It's beautiful.
It's got a mystical quality to it, man. Like it's
Really?
It's unbelievable that shit came from a human hand.
Yeah, it's perfect, and the color is just so rich.
Well, I mean, if I hadn't kept it in a drawer somewhere, it probably would have faded by now, wouldn't it? But now, do you know who that is?
Yeah, what is that, like Opus or one of those? What the hell is that?
That is Bill the cat from Bloom County.
Bloom County, that's it. Yeah.
I was a huge fan of Burt Breathed's Bloom County. I love that stuff with the penguin. Opus the penguin, was it? I don't know what other stuff I've got this here as well. I mean, that's not. I mean, this is the Actress and the Bishop. This is the first. This is artwork also. There you go. And I think actually I did actually swipe her from a photograph, although I'm not admitting to it.
I still feel like you posed Mick McMahon in a Pope hat, man. I've seen some photos.
Have you ever spoken to Mick? You ought to interview him.
We're huge fans. We're giant fans of his work. We just don't have a connection to him.
Well, I can give you one.
That'd be incredible. Like every evolution of his work from Dread to Slain and beyond. Like,
yes,
giant
it's
fan.
Wonderful, isn't it? Yeah. Well, I Zoomed him very recently. He's all of us, now that we're all in lockdown, we're all very keen to talk to another human being. So I'll give you a link.
That'd be awesome. We'll definitely taking advantage of that. Brian, it's so cool seeing that color work, because I mean, you are like one of the first guys who was able to digitally capture the same basic aesthetic that you got practically. You know, that was something that cartoonists are always chasing. And God damn it, man, seeing those practical examples, if you would have made me guess, holding up the actual comic book covers, I would have just assumed that would have been, that digital approach that you've done in later years afterwards.
Yeah. No, I mean, the what ends up on the page is going to remain the same. However, by whatever means I produce it, I would have thought, apart from the fact that you've got to try to avoid making it look too computery.
Yeah.
I mean, I have actually gone with some of my Invisibles covers. I thought, well, I am using a kind of photo editing software here. Let's do a little bit of photo collage on here. I did one. Oh no, this is getting just too tediously detailed, but occasionally I'll throw in a little bit of a little bit of photography into a drawn piece. But there you go.
Brian, you talked about your cover process as going through the scripts and, identifying scenes or moments that you think that's a good cover idea.
Yeah.
As a result, it makes me think, you've read all of these comic runs, you've had these long runs on different as a cover artist. Do any stand out to you, as you were reading those scripts, any favorites in terms of like the writer or the stories that you were encountering?
Yes, I really enjoyed, I did a long run of covers on Animal Man, and I think at the time Grant Morrison wasn't a terribly well-known writer, and like me, he'd sort of migrated into American comics. I mean, he's from Scotland, and it's my guess, I mean, I could be wrong, but at the beginning they thought, let's put him on, let's try him out on a not very popular or even well-known character, Animal Man, because they didn't know he was going to be so good. and he turned it into this sort of rather interesting kind of meta, interesting thing. I did enjoy the development of the Animal Man character during the Grant Morrison phase. I also absolutely loved Doom Patrol, his Doom Patrol. And Richard Case was drawing the interiors, Grant was writing them. Simon Bisley was doing fantastic. Some of my favorite Simon Bisley work was on the covers of Doom Patrol, and it was just so bonkers that I think when they collected them together, I sort of talked my way into letting me do. I did 5 covers on the collected editions of Doom Patrol, and I love that stuff. And it's made a very curious television series, hasn't it?
Yeah,
which I'm not really entirely following the TV series. It's gone a little bit too for me, but I love Grant Morrison's writing in Doom Patrol.
Yeah, Morrison is somebody who I thought of as soon as you described that process. One, because you've worked on several of his books, but also I imagine his scripts would be a really interesting read, seeing those in script form and seeing some of the ideas that he would explore. It seems like that'd be an interesting one.
Well, I must have drawn covers for The Invisibles based on his scripts. I mean, looking back, I'm terribly sorry, but my memory of how I got from the scripts to what was on the covers is a bit of a mystery to me. I remember when we did the final volume of The Invisibles, he had this idea of counting backwards. It was being numbered from 12 to 1, going backwards to lead up to the millennium. And of course, we missed it because it got a bit late. But by then, I'm not even sure I was reading the stories. I had this great relationship with Shelley Bond, who was the editor, and I just went off into this fantasy land of my own where I was just using these numbers as cues to come up with cover ideas, all of which had to get stranger and stranger as they went on. I mean, when it came to the collected edition of one story, I can't remember which one, we called it The Blobby Man. I don't know whether you'd have access to any of this stuff, but I decided I would do a sort of photo collage in the style of Francis Bacon, the painter Francis Bacon, of this rather disgusting, deformed, sort of possibly distorted human figure in a box. I'm not even sure how it at all related to the stuff on the inside. But you're asking me what? You're asking me how?
That was it. I was just curious about if there were if there were writing series or books that stood out to you, and you definitely answered.
I did one cover, which was a big collected edition of The Invisibles, and somebody, possibly Grant, had said he wanted a big pink hand grenade on the cover, so I supplied a big pink hand grenade. And in the background, I just went through all of the dialogue from the stories and just wrote them in very tiny type all the way to fill the background with no gaps. I don't know whether you know this cover, but by then I was, being allowed to just come up with things that amused me. And you can vaguely read what it says in the background, but also I tried to make it so that some of the letters reading downwards would actually read out a secret message, like overthrow the world order or something like that.
That seems perfect for an Invisibles cover.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Jimmy, we can do this all day, man. Should we wrap things up?
Yeah, that covers all of my notes.
Brian,
for the most part there.
Brian, do you have some things that you'd like to plug before we split?
Not really, man. I think I've covered all the things I'm currently doing. Just lots of, I've got 3 or more covers yet to come out. There's a Swamp Thing cover. There's another Joker cover to come out. There's the cover of a 2000 AD. All covers really, apart from these occasional self-indulgent bits of stuff, The Actress and the Bishop and bits of that sort, which you might have to find me on Facebook or Instagram or somewhere like that. But Beyond that, I couldn't tell you.
Really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation with us. I encourage people to kind of put your name into YouTube, give a search, and you could find some really good interviews on like the 2000 AD YouTube channel, Forbidden Planet, and there's a lot of great kind of anecdotal information, cool stories from just fandom and your experience coming up. We didn't want to ask those kinds of questions and just rehash that same stuff that could be found elsewhere, but that's very, very, very valuable, and I encourage everybody to check that stuff out. I guess I'm good to go if you guys are.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mr. Bolland.
Well, it's a great pleasure. Nice meeting you, and I shall look forward to seeing us all on whatever, is it YouTube or what are you on?
Yes,
yeah.
YouTube.
Okay. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.